The radio crackled with static as enemy forces closed in on the isolated outpost. Ammunition was running low, communication lines were severed, and the small team of soldiers huddled behind crumbling concrete barriers knew they were outnumbered 20-1. Their commanding officer had been killed in the first wave of the attack, leaving them leaderless and desperate. Then, through the chaos of gunfire and explosions, a calm female voice cut through the radio frequency. "This is Black Viper requesting immediate coordinates for air support." The young corporal holding the radio looked around at his fellow soldiers with confusion. Black Viper? None of them had ever heard that call sign before. Who was this woman, and how had she accessed their secure military channel? "Unknown pilot, this is Delta 7, the corporal responded, his voice shaking. "We're taking heavy fire and need immediate evacuation. We have wounded and are running out of ammo." "Delta 7, Black Viper copies. Stand by for immediate close air support. Mark your position with smoke and get your heads down." What happened next would become the stuff of military legend. What those soldiers didn't know was that they were about to witness the deadliest female pilot in modern combat history in action. A woman who had been dismissed by her instructors, ridiculed by her peers, and told countless times that she wasn't cut out for military aviation. But on this day, in the mountains of Afghanistan, Captain Sarah Mitchell would prove that sometimes the most underestimated person in a room is exactly who you need when everything falls apart. Her call sign wasn't just a name, it was a promise. And she was about to deliver on it in the most spectacular way possible. This is the true story of how one woman's determination to prove herself would save dozens of lives and change military aviation forever. A story of resilience, skill, and the moment when a colonel who had once doubted her would speak her call sign with nothing but respect and admiration. Sarah Mitchell never dreamed of becoming a pilot. Growing up in a small farming town in Kansas, she spent her childhood helping her father repair tractors and combines, her small hands perfect for reaching into tight spaces where larger fingers couldn't fit. While other girls her age were playing with dolls or learning to braid hair, Sarah was learning the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver, memorizing the intricacies of diesel engines, and developing an intuitive understanding of how machines worked. Her father, Robert Mitchell, was a quiet man who believed in fixing things rather than replacing them. He ran a small repair shop out of their barn, and Sarah became his unofficial apprentice by the age of 8. She would sit on an overturned milk crate, watching intently as he diagnosed problems with farming equipment, learning to listen to the subtle differences in engine sounds that could indicate everything from a loose belt to a failing transmission. "Machines don't lie, Sarah," her father would tell her as they worked side by side in the dim light of the barn. "They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen. People complicate things, but machines are honest. They either work or they don't, and there's always a reason why." This philosophy would shape Sarah's approach to everything in her life. She learned to trust her instincts, to pay attention to details others might miss, and to never give up on a problem until she found the solution. These weren't skills that anyone expected would translate to military aviation, but they were exactly what made Sarah different from every other pilot candidate who would come after her. Sarah's mother, Linda, worried about her daughter's interests. She wanted Sarah to develop more traditional feminine skills, to make friends with other girls her age, to show interest in the things that mothers typically hope their daughters would care about. But Sarah was happiest when she was elbow deep in an engine, covered in grease, solving problems that had stumped mechanics with decades more experience. The first time Sarah saw a military aircraft up close was at the county fair when she was 15 years old. The Air Force had brought a recruitment display, including a decommissioned fighter jet that visitors could climb into and explore. While most of the teenagers were more interested in the carnival rides and cotton candy, Sarah spent 3 hours examining every detail of the aircraft, asking the recruiters technical questions that surprised them with their sophistication. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the recruiter in charge of the display, noticed Sarah immediately. She wasn't asking the typical questions about how fast the plane could fly or how many missiles it could carry. Instead, she wanted to know about the hydraulic systems, the redundancy built into the control mechanisms, and how pilots managed to control such a complex machine while flying at high speeds. Most kids want to know about the weapons, Rodriguez told her as she examined the cockpit controls. You're asking about the engineering. Why is that? Because the weapons don't matter if the plane doesn't fly, Sarah replied, without looking up from the instrument panel. And the plane won't fly if the systems aren't properly maintained and understood. I want to know how it all works together. Rodriguez had been recruiting for the Air Force for 6 years, and he had never met a teenager who grasped that fundamental truth so clearly. Most young people were attracted to the glamour and excitement of military aviation. Sarah was interested in the science and precision required to make it work. Have you ever thought about becoming a pilot? He asked her. Sarah laughed, but not in a dismissive way. I'm from Millerville, Kansas. Population 812. Girls from here become teachers or nurses or maybe accountants if they're lucky. We don't become fighter pilots. Says who? Rodriguez challenged. That simple question changed everything for Sarah. She had always assumed that certain careers were simply not available to people like her. She came from a family of farmers and mechanics from a town where the most exciting thing that happened was the annual corn festival. Military aviation seemed as distant and unrealistic as becoming an astronaut or a movie star. But Rodriguez saw something in Sarah that she didn't yet see in herself. He gave her his business card and told her to call him if she ever wanted to learn more about military aviation opportunities. Sarah tucked the card into her wallet and forgot about it for almost 2 years. The catalyst that changed Sarah's life came during her senior year of high school. Her father suffered a heart attack while working in a shop, and Sarah found him collapsed next to a partially disassembled combine. She performed CPR until the ambulance arrived, but the damage was too severe. Robert Mitchell died 3 days later in the hospital, leaving behind medical bills that threatened to bankrupt the family. Sarah's mother was forced to sell the repair shop and most of their land to pay the debts. The future that Sarah had always envisioned, taking over the family business, staying in Millerville, maybe eventually marrying someone from a neighboring farm, disappeared overnight. At the funeral, Sarah sat in the front pew of the small Methodist church where her family had worshipped for 3 generations, listening to the pastor talk about her father's character and work ethic. The church was packed with farmers and other working people whose equipment Robert had repaired over the years. Many of them spoke about how he had never charged full price for emergency repairs, how he had extended credit during difficult seasons, how he had taught their sons and daughters to fix things that other mechanics said couldn't be fixed. Your father believed that honest work was its own reward, the pastor said in his eulogy. He taught us that excellence doesn't require recognition, and that true satisfaction comes from doing your best even when no one is watching. After the service, as Sarah was cleaning out her father's desk in the barn, she found the business card that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had given her 2 years earlier. She stared at it for a long time, thinking about her father's words about machines being honest, about the importance of understanding how things work, about never giving up on a problem until you find the solution. That night, Sarah called Rodriguez. He was surprised to hear from her after so much time had passed, but he remembered their conversation clearly. When Sarah explained her situation, her father's death, the financial problems, her need to find a way to pay for college, Rodriguez saw an opportunity to help someone who had impressed him with her genuine interest in aviation mechanics. The Air Force will pay for your education, he told her. But more than that, if you're serious about becoming a pilot, we'll give you the training and opportunities you'll never find anywhere else. The question is, are you ready for the challenge? Sarah looked around the empty barn where she had spent countless hours working alongside her father, learning lessons that she was only beginning to understand. The smell of motor oil and metal still lingered in the air, along with memories of a man who had taught her that excellence was possible even in the most ordinary circumstances. I'm ready, she said. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell left Millerville, Kansas, for basic military training. She had never been on an airplane, never lived away from home, never been around people who didn't know her family's history in the community. She was 18 years old, terrified, and more determined than she had ever been in her life. Her mother drove her to the bus station in the neighboring town, both of them crying but trying to hide it from each other. As the bus pulled away, Sarah watched the flat Kansas landscape roll past the window, thinking about her father's lessons about honest work and never giving up on difficult problems. She had no way of knowing that those lessons learned in a small-town repair shop would eventually make her one of the most feared and respected pilots in the United States Air Force. All she knew was that she was beginning a journey that would test everything her father had taught her about persistence, excellence, and the importance of understanding how things work. The bus ride to basic training took 14 hours, giving Sarah plenty of time to think about what she was leaving behind and what she hoped to find ahead. She had packed light, a single duffel bag containing a few changes of clothes, some family photographs, and her father's favorite wrench set. The wrenches were impractical and probably against regulations, but she couldn't bear to leave them behind. As the bus crossed state lines and the landscape gradually changed from flat farmland to rolling hills, Sarah began to understand that she was not just traveling to a new place. She was traveling toward a completely different version of herself. The girl from Millerville who helped her father fix tractors was still there, but she was about to discover capabilities and strengths she never knew existed. When the bus finally arrived at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, Sarah stepped off into humidity and heat unlike anything she had experienced in Kansas. The air was thick and oppressive, and the noise level was overwhelming after the quiet of small-town life. Drill instructors were shouting orders, recruits were scrambling to form lines with their luggage, and Sarah felt a moment of panic as she realized she was completely out of her element. But then she remembered her father's voice. "Machines don't lie, Sarah. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen." Basic training was just another machine, she told herself. It had a purpose, a function, and a logical structure. Her job was to figure out how it worked and what it required from her. That mindset would serve her well in the challenging weeks ahead. But Sarah had no way of knowing that her real challenges were still to come. Basic training would test her physical and mental limits, but pilot training would test something even more fundamental: her belief in herself and her right to pursue a dream that many people would tell her was impossible for someone like her. Basic military training nearly broke Sarah Mitchell before she had a chance to prove what she could accomplish. The physical demands were unlike anything she had experienced, despite years of hard work on the family farm. Running in formation under the Texas sun, completing obstacle courses designed to push recruits beyond their perceived limits, and enduring sleep deprivation while maintaining perfect attention to detail challenged every assumption she had about her own capabilities. Technical Instructor Williams was a 20-year veteran who had seen thousands of recruits pass through basic training. He had a reputation for being able to identify within the first week which recruits would succeed and which would wash out. When he first observed Sarah during physical training, struggling to keep pace with recruits who had been athletes in high school, he mentally placed her in the category of well-meaning young people who would eventually realize that military service was more demanding than they had anticipated. But Williams missed something crucial about Sarah Mitchell. The same stubbornness that had kept her working on mechanical problems long after other people would have given up now manifested as an absolute refusal to quit, even when her body screamed for rest and her lungs burned from exertion. While other recruits looked for ways to avoid the most challenging exercises, Sarah sought them out, understanding that her success depended on pushing herself beyond her current limitations. The turning point came during the 4th week of training, when Sarah's flight was tasked with a night navigation exercise that required them to work as a team to find their way through unfamiliar terrain using only basic equipment and the skills they had learned. The exercise was designed to test problem-solving abilities under pressure, and it was not uncommon for groups to become lost or confused in the darkness. Sarah's group included Marcus Johnson, a former college football player from Chicago who had assumed he would naturally emerge as the group's leader, and Jennifer Parks, a competitive swimmer from California who was physically stronger than most of the male recruits. Also in the group were David Chun, a quiet computer science major from Seattle, and Tony Martinez, a mechanic from New Mexico who shared Sarah's background in repairing engines but lacked her analytical approach to problem solving. When the group was dropped off at the starting point just after sunset, Johnson immediately began issuing orders about which direction they should head and how they should organize their formation. Parks and Martinez followed his lead without question, but Sarah studied the map and compassed more carefully, cross-referencing the terrain features she could observe with the topographical information provided. "I think we're heading in the wrong direction," Sarah said quietly after they had been walking for 30 minutes. Johnson stopped and turned to face her, his frustration evident even in the darkness. "We've been following the compass heading exactly like they taught us," he said. "Just because you're from some farm in Kansas doesn't mean you know more about navigation than the rest of us." Sarah felt the familiar sting of being dismissed because of her background, but she had learned during the past month that anger was less useful than evidence. "Look at the ridgeline to our east," she said, pointing toward a series of hills barely visible against the starlit sky. "According to the map, that formation should be to our south if we're heading in the right direction. Either the compass is wrong, or we made an error in our initial bearing." Chun, who had been quietly listening to the exchange, studied the map with his flashlight. "She's right," he said after a few minutes. "We're probably a half-mile off course already." Johnson was not accustomed to being corrected, especially by someone he perceived as less qualified than himself. "Look, farm girl," he said, his voice carrying the edge of someone whose authority was being challenged. "I played football at the Division I level. I know about teamwork and leadership. Why don't you just focus on keeping up with the group and let people with actual experience handle the navigation?" The comment hit Sarah harder than Johnson probably intended. Throughout basic training, she had been constantly reminded that she was different from her fellow recruits, less polished, less educated, less naturally athletic. The fact that Johnson was probably right about her lack of experience and leadership made the criticism even more painful. But Sarah had learned something important from her father about the difference between being right and being loud. "You might be right about my lack of experience," she said calmly, "but the compass and map don't care about anyone's football career. We can argue about who should be in charge, or we can figure out where we actually are and get to the objective before sunrise." Parks, who had been growing increasingly concerned about their progress, spoke up for the first time. "What do you think we should do?" Sarah spread the map on the ground and used her flashlight to illuminate the terrain features. "If we backtrack about a quarter mile and then adjust our bearing 15 degrees to the south, we should intersect with this creek bed," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "The creek leads directly to our objective, and it's impossible to get lost if we follow the water." Chin studied the proposed route and nodded. "That makes sense. And if we're wrong, we'll know pretty quickly because we won't find the creek where it's supposed to be." Johnson was clearly unhappy about having his leadership challenged, but he was also beginning to realize that his aggressive confidence was less useful than Sarah's methodical approach to problem solving. "Fine," he said, "but if we get lost because of this, it's on you." Sarah accepted that responsibility without hesitation. "Understood." The route Sarah had identified proved to be correct, and the group reached their objective 2 hours ahead of the projected timeline. More importantly, they had learned to function as a team rather than following the loudest voice in the group. Johnson grudgingly acknowledged Sarah's navigation skills, and the other members of the group began to defer to her judgment when technical problems arose. Technical instructor Williams observed the group's performance during the exercise and noted Sarah's emergence as a problem solver rather than a traditional leader. In his evaluation report, he wrote, "Recruit Mitchell demonstrates exceptional analytical thinking under pressure and an unusual ability to synthesize complex information quickly. Recommend for advanced technical training." That recommendation would prove crucial when Sarah applied for pilot training 6 months later. Competition for flight training slots was intense, with hundreds of qualified candidates competing for a limited number of positions. Sarah's academic record was solid, but not exceptional, and her physical fitness scores, while improved from basic training, were still below average compared to other applicants. What set Sarah apart was her performance on the mechanical aptitude and spatial reasoning assessments that were part of the pilot selection process. The tests were designed to identify candidates who could think in 3 dimensions while managing multiple complex systems simultaneously. Sarah's childhood spent working on farm equipment had given her an intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems function under stress, and she scored in the 98th percentile on evaluations that eliminated most other candidates. Captain Rebecca Torres, the officer responsible for reviewing pilot training applications, was intrigued by Sarah's file. Torres had been one of the first female pilots to see combat in Iraq, and she understood both the opportunities and challenges that women faced in military aviation. Sarah's combination of exceptional technical scores and unremarkable academic record was unusual, and Torres wanted to understand what made this candidate different. The interview took place in a sterile conference room at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform and carrying a folder containing letters of recommendation from her basic training instructors and supervisors from technical school. She was nervous, but determined to present herself as professionally as possible. Torres began the interview with standard questions about Sarah's motivation for wanting to become a pilot and her understanding of the challenges involved. Sarah's answers were honest and direct, without the rehearsed quality that characterized many other applicants. "Why do you want to fly?" Torres asked. "Because I understand machines," Sarah replied. "I've been working on engines and mechanical systems since I was a child, and I know how to diagnose problems and find solutions quickly. Flying is just another type of problem solving, except the stakes are higher and the environment is more complex." Torres was surprised by the response. Most applicants talked about their desire to serve their country or their childhood dreams of flying. Sarah's answer was more practical and, in Torres's opinion, more honest. "What makes you think you can succeed in an environment where many people with better educational credentials have failed?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I know what it's like to work on problems that other people can't solve," she said. "I've spent my whole life being underestimated because of where I come from and what people expect from someone like me. That's taught me to prove myself through performance rather than credentials." Torres spent another 30 minutes probing Sarah's technical knowledge and decision-making processes. She presented hypothetical scenarios involving mechanical failures and emergency situations, asking Sarah to walk through her thought processes for diagnosis and response. Sarah's answers revealed a methodical approach to problem solving that impressed Torres with its maturity and sophistication. At the end of the interview, Torres asked the question that often determined whether candidates were accepted or rejected. "What will you do if you don't succeed in pilot training?" Many candidates answered this question by insisting that failure was not an option, demonstrating either overconfidence or a lack of realistic understanding about the challenges ahead. Sarah's response was different. "If I don't succeed, it won't be because I didn't give everything I had," she said. "But if I do fail, I'll figure out what went wrong, learn from it, and find another way to serve. My father taught me that honest work is its own reward, regardless of whether other people recognize it." Torres approved Sarah's application that afternoon, but she also added a note to Sarah's file that would follow her throughout flight training. "This candidate has unusual potential, but will face significant challenges in adapting to the cultural expectations of military aviation. Recommend close monitoring and additional support as needed." Flight training began 6 weeks later at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Sarah arrived with 12 other candidates who had been selected from hundreds of applicants. Looking around at her fellow students during the orientation briefing, she realized immediately that she was different from everyone else in the program. Her classmates included former college athletes, engineering graduates from prestigious universities, and several candidates who already had civilian pilot licenses. Many of them came from military families and had been preparing for careers in aviation since childhood. They spoke confidently about aerodynamics and aircraft systems, using technical terminology that Sarah had only encountered in textbooks. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, the commanding officer of the pilot training program, addressed the new students with a speech that was clearly designed to intimidate as much as it was to inform. Patterson was a former fighter pilot who had flown combat missions in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and his reputation for demanding perfection was legendary among Air Force training programs. "Gentlemen and lady," Patterson began, his eyes scanning the room before settling briefly on Sarah, "you are beginning the most challenging training program in the United States military. Over the next 18 months, we will push you beyond your perceived limitations in every area: physical, mental, and emotional. Most of you will not complete this program. Those who do will earn the right to call themselves Air Force pilots. Those who don't will find other ways to serve their country." Patterson paused to let his words sink in before continuing. "I don't care about your college degrees, your athletic achievements, or your family connections. I only care about one thing. Can you fly a military aircraft safely and effectively in combat conditions? We're going to find out." The academic phase of pilot training was intense, but manageable for Sarah. She studied longer and harder than most of her classmates, but her mechanical background helped her understand aircraft systems more intuitively than candidates who approached flying from a purely theoretical perspective. Her scores on written examinations were consistently in the top third of the class, which surprised instructors who had expected her to struggle with the technical coursework. The real test began when students started flying actual aircraft. Sarah's first flight was an AT-6 Texan, a single-engine trainer that was designed to introduce new pilots to the basics of military aviation. Her instructor was Captain Mike Sullivan, a former bomber pilot who had been assigned to flight training after completing his combat tour. Sullivan had read Sarah's file and noted the unusual path that had brought her to pilot training. He was curious about how someone with no previous aviation experience would adapt to the demands of flying, especially given the pressure that all students face to demonstrate competence quickly or be eliminated from the program. The first flight was a familiarization ride designed to give students a feel for the aircraft and basic flight controls. Sullivan handled takeoff and landing while allowing Sarah to experience straight and level flight, gentle turns, and basic maneuvers. For most students, the first flight was overwhelming. The sensation of three-dimensional movement, the complexity of the instrument panel, and the speed at which everything happened combined to create sensory overload. Sarah's reaction was different. Within minutes of taking the controls, she was making small adjustments to heading and altitude with a precision that surprised Sullivan. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, without the jerky overcorrections that characterized most new pilots. "Have you flown before?" Sullivan asked through the intercom system. "No, sir," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the excitement she felt. "But this feels similar to operating heavy equipment. You have to think ahead and make small corrections before problems become big ones." Sullivan smiled to himself, remembering his own first flight and how overwhelming it had seemed. Sarah's ability to relate flying to her previous experience with mechanical systems was exactly the kind of adaptability that separated successful pilots from those who washed out. Over the following weeks, Sarah's progress exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. She demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how aircraft responded to control inputs, and her situational awareness, the ability to maintain mental picture of her aircraft's position and status while managing multiple tasks simultaneously, was exceptional for someone with no previous aviation experience. But Sarah's success in the air was not matched by acceptance from all of her fellow students. While some of her classmates respected her abilities and welcomed her as a teammate, Others resented what they perceived as special attention given to the program's only female student. The tension was usually subtle. Comments about how standards might be lowered to accommodate diversity goals, or suggestions that Sarah's success was due to instructor bias rather than genuine ability. The criticism hurt, but it also motivated Sarah to work even harder to prove that her achievements were legitimate. She volunteered for extra flights, studied longer than required, and sought feedback from instructors who could help her improve areas where she was still developing competence. Her perseverance paid off during the program's most challenging phase, formation flying and aerobatics. These skills required pilots to operate their aircraft at the edge of performance envelopes while maintaining precise control and coordination with other aircraft. Many students who had performed well in basic flying struggled with the demands of advanced maneuvers, and several were eliminated during this phase of training. Sarah thrived in the advanced flying environment. Her ability to process complex information quickly and make precise adjustments under pressure made her a natural at formation flying. Instructors began using her flights as demonstrations for other students, and her confidence grew as she realized that she was not just surviving pilot training, she was excelling at it. The transformation was remarkable. The young woman who had arrived at flight training uncertain about her place among more traditionally qualified candidates was becoming one of the program's standout performers. But Sarah's real tests lay ahead in the unforgiving environment of combat training, where the margin for error disappeared entirely and the stakes became a matter of life and death. Advanced fighter training at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona represented a quantum leap in complexity from the basic flight instruction Sarah had mastered in Texas. The aircraft she would now learn to fly, the F-16 Fighting Falcon, was a single-seat, multi-role fighter capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2. Unlike the trainer aircraft where instructors could intervene if students made mistakes, F-16 training put students alone in the cockpit with machines that could kill them in seconds if they lost focus or made critical errors. Major Patricia Hayes, Sarah's new flight commander, had been flying F-16s for 8 years and had logged over 200 combat hours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hayes was known for her analytical approach to flying and her ability to identify pilot weaknesses that could become fatal flaws in combat situations. She had trained dozens of new fighter pilots, but Sarah Mitchell presented a unique challenge. On paper, Sarah's performance in basic flight training had been exceptional. Her technical scores were among the highest in her class, and her flying skills had consistently exceeded instructor expectations. But Hayes understood that success in trainer aircraft did not automatically translate to competence in high-performance fighters. The F-16 demanded a level of multitasking and situational awareness that eliminated pilots who couldn't adapt to the dramatically increased pace of operations. Sarah's first F-16 flight was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after she had completed basic pilot training. She arrived at the squadron building 3 hours before her scheduled takeoff time, using the extra time to review aircraft systems manuals and emergency procedures. The F-16's cockpit contained over 100 switches, buttons, and displays, each serving multiple functions depending on the aircraft configuration and mission requirements. The aircraft she would fly that morning was tail number 88-0123, a Block 30 F-16C that had been in service for over 15 years. The jet had logged thousands of flight hours and had been flown by hundreds of pilots during training missions. Sarah performed her pre-flight inspection with meticulous attention to detail, examining every external component and checking fluid levels, tire condition, and control surface movement. Captain Tom Rodriguez, the instructor pilot who would monitor Sarah's first solo flight from the ground, briefed her on the mission profile, basic aircraft familiarization, including takeoff, climb to altitude, straight and level flight at various power settings, gentle turns, and landing. The flight was designed to be conservative and safe, allowing Sarah to experience the F-16's characteristics without pushing performance limits. Remember, Rodriguez told her as they completed the briefing. "This jet has about 10 times the power of anything you've flown before. Everything happens faster, and you have less time to correct mistakes. Trust your training, but don't hesitate to ask for help if anything feels wrong." Sarah nodded, but internally she was fighting a combination of excitement and terror that threatened to overwhelm her concentration. This was the moment she had been working towards since that conversation with the Air Force recruiter at the county fair 4 years earlier. Everything she had endured, basic training, flight school, months of studying, and preparation, had led to this opportunity to prove herself worthy of flying one of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. The engine start procedure took 15 minutes, with Sarah carefully following the checklist while monitoring dozens of parameters to ensure all systems were functioning normally. The F-16's Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine produced over 25,000 pounds of thrust, and Sarah could feel the aircraft vibrating around her as the engine spooled up to idle power. Ground control cleared her to taxi to the runway, and Sarah carefully maneuvered the aircraft through the maze of taxiways, constantly checking her position and monitoring radio communications from other aircraft in the pattern. The F-16's bubble canopy provided excellent visibility, but the aircraft's dimensions took some adjustment after the smaller trainers she had been flying. Cleared for takeoff, Sarah aligned the aircraft with the runway centerline and slowly advanced the throttle to full military power. The acceleration was unlike anything she had experienced. The F-16 gained speed so rapidly that she had to concentrate to avoid over-controlling as the aircraft approached takeoff velocity. At 140 knots, she gently pulled back on the stick, and the fighter lifted smoothly into the Arizona desert sky. The climb to altitude was exhilarating. Unlike trainer aircraft that labored to gain altitude, the F-16 shot upward like an elevator, reaching 10,000 feet in less than 2 minutes. Sarah leveled off and began the series of basic maneuvers outlined in her flight plan, getting a feel for how the aircraft responded to control inputs and learning to manage the constant flow of information from the cockpit displays. Everything went smoothly until Sarah attempted her first high-speed turn at 20,000 feet. She had performed similar maneuvers dozens of times in trainer aircraft, but the F-16's power and responsiveness caught her off guard. As she pulled the stick back to initiate the turn, the aircraft's nose pitched up more sharply than she had intended, and she felt the onset of G-forces that pressed her down into her seat with crushing intensity. The world began to gray out around the edges of her vision as blood drained from her brain under the stress of sustained G-force. Sarah realized with growing panic that she was approaching G-force levels that could cause her to lose consciousness, and she was struggling to maintain control of the aircraft as her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Training took over where conscious thought failed. Sarah automatically relaxed back pressure on the stick, reducing the G-force loading and allowing blood to return to her brain. Her vision cleared, and she found herself in a gentle climb with the aircraft under control, but she was shaken by how quickly the situation had deteriorated. "Viper 23, this is Luke Tower," came Rodriguez's calm voice over the radio. "How are you doing up there?" Sarah took a deep breath before responding, trying to keep the stress out of her voice. "Luke Tower, Viper 23. I'm Fine. Just getting familiar with the aircraft's performance characteristics." "Copy that, Viper 23. Take your time, and remember that the jet will do whatever you ask it to do. Your job is to ask nicely." The remainder of the flight proceeded without incident, and Sarah landed the F-16 with a sense of accomplishment tempered by humility about how much she still had to learn. The debrief with Rodriguez focused on the high-G episode and the importance of building experience gradually rather than trying to explore the aircraft's full capabilities immediately. "Every pilot goes through what you experienced today," Rodriguez told her. "The F-16 is an honest airplane, but it's also unforgiving. It will amplify both good technique and bad technique. Your recovery from that high-G situation was textbook perfect, which tells me you have the reflexes and training to be safe in this aircraft. But it also shows you how quickly things can get away from you if you're not paying attention. Over the following months, Sarah progressed through the advanced phases of F-16 training: air-to-air combat maneuvering, surface attack missions, night flying, and instrument procedures. Each phase presented new challenges that tested different aspects of her abilities as a pilot. Air-to-air combat required split-second decision-making and the ability to think tactically while flying at the edge of the aircraft's performance envelope. Surface attack missions demanded precision bombing skills and the ability to navigate at low altitude while avoiding simulated enemy defenses. Sarah's performance continued to exceed expectations, but she also began to develop a reputation among her instructors and fellow students that would eventually lead to her call sign. During a training mission that simulated an attack on a heavily defended target, Sarah demonstrated an unusual combination of aggression and precision that caught everyone's attention. The mission required her to penetrate simulated enemy airspace, avoid multiple surface-to-air missile sites, and deliver precision-guided munitions on a target no larger than a small building. Intelligence briefings indicated that the target was heavily defended and that previous attack attempts by other students had resulted in simulated shoot-downs or mission failures. Sarah approached the problem methodically, studying the terrain and threat locations until she identified a route that would allow her to approach the target from an unexpected direction. Instead of following the obvious flight path that led directly to the target, she planned a circuitous route that took advantage of natural terrain masking and avoided the engagement envelopes of known threats. The mission profile required her to fly at extremely low altitude, less than 100 feet above the desert floor, while navigating through a series of canyons and ridgelines that would mask her approach from enemy radar. Few pilots attempted this type of flying during training because of the risks involved. A moment of inattention or a slight navigation error at that altitude could result in controlled flight into terrain, the military euphemism for flying into the ground. Sarah executed the low-level approach with surgical precision, using her mechanical intuition to feel how the aircraft responded to the turbulent air near the ground, and making constant micro-corrections to maintain her planned altitude and track. She emerged from the canyon approach undetected by the simulated defenses and delivered her weapons on target with an accuracy that impressed even veteran instructors. But what really caught everyone's attention was what happened next. Instead of immediately climbing to altitude and departing the target area, Sarah remained at low altitude and executed a series of aggressive maneuvers that confused and frustrated the operators of the simulated air defense systems. She used the terrain and her aircraft's capabilities to avoid multiple missile launches, turning what should have been a straightforward escape into a cat-and-mouse game that demonstrated advanced tactical thinking. Major Hayes, who had been monitoring the mission from the ground, was both impressed and concerned by Sarah's performance. The mission had been successful beyond any reasonable expectation, but Sarah had also taken risks that pushed the boundaries of acceptable training protocols. That was either brilliant flying or dangerous showboating, Hayes told Sarah during the post-mission debrief. "I'm still trying to decide which." Sarah considered her response carefully. "Ma'am, I understand that I deviated from standard procedures during the escape phase, but the scenario was supposed to simulate a high-threat environment where predictable tactics would get you killed. I was trying to think like an enemy pilot would think and respond accordingly." Hayes nodded slowly. "And that's exactly what concerns me. You're thinking like a predator instead of just following procedures. That mindset can make you very effective in combat, but it can also make you dangerous to yourself and others if you don't learn to control it." The conversation marked a turning point in Sarah's training. Hayes began assigning her increasingly complex and challenging missions designed to test both her flying skills and her judgment under pressure. Sarah thrived on the additional challenges, consistently finding innovative solutions to tactical problems that stumped other students. Her reputation for aggressive precision flying began to attract attention from instructors throughout the training squadron. During one particularly challenging mission that involved simulated air-to-air combat against multiple adversaries, Sarah demonstrated the tactical awareness and situational management skills that would eventually earn her the call sign that defined her career. The scenario pitted her against 3 instructor pilots flying as simulated enemy aircraft. The mission profile indicated that she was outnumbered and outgunned, with the expectation that she would demonstrate basic defensive flying skills before eventually being shot down by the superior force. Sarah had other ideas. Instead of flying defensively and trying to avoid engagement, she used the vertical dimension and her aircraft's power advantage to separate the 3 adversaries and engage them individually. She climbed to high altitude, then dove on the first enemy aircraft with enough speed to complete her attack and escape before the other 2 could respond effectively. The tactic worked perfectly, but it also put her aircraft under tremendous stress as she pulled out of the high-speed dive. The G-forces required a change from a steep descent to level flight at high speed were at the edge of both human and machine capabilities. Sarah managed the maneuver successfully, but just barely. She repeated the tactic twice more, using variations in timing and approach angle to keep the remaining adversaries off balance. By the end of the exercise, she had scored simulated kills on all 3 instructor pilots, turning what should have been a defensive exercise into an aggressive victory. The debrief that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training. The 3 instructor pilots were veteran combat veterans with hundreds of flight hours in actual combat situations. They were not accustomed to being outflown by student pilots, especially using tactics that pushed aircraft and pilot to their operational limits. "Where did you learn those tactics?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, the lead instructor pilot. "I didn't learn them anywhere, sir," Sarah replied. "I was trying to think about what would give me the best chance of survival in that situation, and those were the options that made the most sense." Stevens exchanged glances with the other instructors. Student pilots were supposed to demonstrate competence with standard procedures, not develop innovative tactics on their own. Sarah's performance suggested a level of tactical thinking that was unusual for someone with her limited experience. "What you did today was effective," Stevens said carefully, "but it was also extremely dangerous. You were operating at the edge of what's possible with that aircraft. In a training environment, that's impressive. In combat, it could save your life or get you killed, depending on execution." "Yes, sir. I understand the risks." "I don't think you do," Stevens replied. "The tactics you use today require absolute precision. There's no margin for error. If you're going to fly like that, you need to be perfect every time because imperfection gets you killed." Stevens paused and looked directly at Sarah. "We're going to start calling you Black Viper because you hunt like a predator and you strike with precision. But remember that vipers are dangerous to everything around them, including themselves if they're not careful." The call sign stuck immediately. Within days, everyone in the squadron was referring to Sarah as Black Viper, and the name followed her through the remainder of her training. Some instructors used it with respect, acknowledging her exceptional skills and tactical awareness. Others used it with a hint of concern, worried that her aggressive approach to flying might lead to accidents or poor judgment in actual combat situations. Sarah embraced the call sign and what it represented. She understood that her instructors saw her as potentially dangerous to enemies and to herself, but she also knew that her unconventional background and approach to problem-solving gave her capabilities that traditionally trained pilots might not possess. Her father's lessons about understanding how machines work and never giving up on difficult problems had translated into an ability to push aircraft and tactics beyond conventional limitations. As she progressed through the final phases of fighter training, Sarah continued to refine her skills and developed a reputation that would eventually make her one of the most feared attack pilots in combat. But she had no way of knowing that her real test would come not in the controlled environment of training missions, but in the mountains of Afghanistan, where her call sign would become legend among ground troops who learned to depend on Black Viper's precision and determination when their lives hung in the balance. Fighter training graduation was scheduled for a Friday morning in June, 10 months after Sarah had first climbed into an F-16 cockpit. The ceremony was attended by family members, squadron commanders, and senior Air Force leadership who came to recognize the achievements of pilots who had successfully completed one of the military's most demanding training programs. Sarah's mother made the trip from Kansas, still struggling to understand how her daughter had transformed from a small-town farm girl into a fighter pilot. Linda Mitchell sat in the front row of the base auditorium, watching her daughter receive her wings and officially join the ranks of Air Force aviators. During the ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, who had overseen Sarah's training from the beginning, presented her with a plaque recognizing her as the outstanding graduate of her training class. The award acknowledged not just her flying skills, but her leadership and her ability to inspire other students to exceed their own expectations. "Black Viper," Patterson said as he shook Sarah's hand, "you've proven that unconventional backgrounds can produce exceptional results. Your next assignment will be to an A-10 squadron in Afghanistan, where you'll have the opportunity to use your skills in support of ground operations. I have no doubt that you'll continue to excel." Sarah accepted the award with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had achieved the goal that had seemed impossible when she first contacted the Air Force recruiter 4 years earlier. But she also understood that training was just preparation for the real challenges that lay ahead. In Afghanistan, there would be no instructors to provide guidance and no opportunity to repeat missions that didn't go according to plan. The young woman who had grown up fixing tractors in Kansas was about to become Black Viper, combat pilot, in one of the world's most dangerous and unforgiving environments. Her call sign had been earned through precision flying and tactical innovation, but it would be validated in combat, where the margin between success and failure was measured in lives rather than training scores. Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan was a sprawling complex of runways, hangars, and temporary buildings that served as the hub for coalition air operations throughout the country. When Sarah arrived in August for her first combat deployment, the base housed over 20,000 military personnel from a dozen different nations, all supporting operations against Taliban and al-Qaeda forces scattered throughout Afghanistan's rugged terrain. The 455th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron, where Sarah would spend the next 6 months, operated 10 Thunderbolt aircraft specifically designed for close air support missions. Unlike the multi-role F-16s she had trained on, the A-10 was built around a single mission, providing precision firepower in support of ground forces engaged in close combat. The aircraft's distinctive twin-engine design, heavy armor, and massive 30mm cannon made it one of the most feared weapons in the American arsenal, but only when flown by pilots who understood how to operate effectively in the chaotic environment of ground combat. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Torres, the squadron commander, had been flying A-10s for 12 years and had completed 3 previous combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Torres was known throughout the Air Force community as one of the most experienced close air support pilots in service, and his squadron had earned a reputation for precision and reliability that made them the preferred choice for the most dangerous and complex missions. When Torres reviewed Sarah's training records and personnel file, he was impressed by her technical skills and flying ability, but he was also concerned about her lack of combat experience and her reputation for aggressive tactics that pushed operational boundaries. Close air support required a different mindset from air-to-air combat or strategic bombing missions. The margin for error was smaller, the consequences of mistakes more severe, and the need for precise coordination with ground forces absolutely critical. "Black Viper," Torres said during Sarah's initial briefing, "I've read your training reports, and your flying skills are exceptional. But combat operations are different from training in ways that you can't fully understand until you experience them. In training, mistakes result in poor grades. In combat, mistakes get people killed, sometimes our own people." Sarah listened intently as Torres explained the squadron's operating procedures and the types of missions she would be expected to fly. Most close air support missions involve responding to requests for assistance from ground units engaged in firefights with enemy forces. The pilot's job was to identify the correct targets, coordinate with ground controllers to ensure friendly forces were not endangered, and deliver precise firepower that eliminated threats without causing collateral damage. The A-10 is a powerful weapon, Torres continued, but it's also a blunt instrument. Our job is to use that power with surgical precision. Ground forces depend on us to be their guardian angels, always there when they need us, accurate when we engage, and smart enough to know when not to shoot. Sarah's first combat mission was scheduled for 3 days later, flying as wingman to Captain David Kim, a veteran pilot with over 100 combat hours. The mission profile was routine: provide aerial reconnaissance and on-call close air support for a convoy of supply trucks moving through a known danger area in eastern Afghanistan. The pre-flight briefing covered intelligence reports indicating possible enemy activity along the convoy route, weather conditions that could affect visibility, and coordination procedures with ground controllers. Sarah absorbed every detail, but she was also fighting the nervous excitement that came with the realization that she would finally be flying combat missions for real. The A-10 she would fly that morning was tail number 78-0691, a veteran aircraft that had been in service for over 20 years and had flown hundreds of combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. During her pre-flight inspection, Sarah noticed patches on the aircraft's skin where battle damage had been repaired, silent testimony to previous encounters with enemy fire. Captain Kim's briefing was straightforward and professional. We'll be flying at medium altitude until we're called down to investigate something specific, he told Sarah as they completed their flight planning. Your job today is to observe, learn, and back me up if things get complicated. Don't try to be a hero on your first mission. There will be plenty of opportunities for that later. The flight to the operational area took 45 minutes, giving Sarah time to familiarize herself with the terrain and practice the communication procedures she had learned during training. The landscape below was dramatically different from the deserts of Arizona, where she had trained. Afghanistan's mountains rose to heights of over 15,000 feet, creating a maze of valleys and ridgelines that provided endless hiding places for enemy forces. The convoy was moving slowly along a winding mountain road that had been carved into the side of a steep valley. From her altitude of 12,000 feet, Sarah could see the line of vehicles stretched out over nearly a mile, making their way carefully around hairpin turns and across bridges that spanned deep ravines. Convoy leader, this is Hog 21, Kim transmitted, using the call sign that identified their A-10 flight. We have your vehicles in sight. Road ahead appears clear. How do you copy? Hog 21, convoy leader. Good copy. We're moving slow due to road conditions, but no problems so far. Good to know you're up there. For 2 hours, Sarah and Kim circled above the convoy, maintaining visual contact and monitoring radio frequencies for any indication of trouble. The mission seemed routine until the convoy reached a particularly narrow section of road where a rock slide had reduced the available passage to barely the width of a single vehicle. As the lead truck carefully navigated around the obstacle, machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions on both sides of the road. The convoy was caught in a perfectly executed ambush, with enemy forces positioned to attack the vehicles when they were most vulnerable and had no room to maneuver. Hog 21, convoy leader, we're taking heavy fire from both sides of the road. Multiple casualties. We need immediate support. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she heard the desperation in the ground controller's voice. Through her binoculars, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions and smoke rising from at least one damaged vehicle. The convoy had stopped moving and was trapped in the kill zone of the ambush. Kim immediately began a descent toward the target area, with Sarah following in formation. Black Viper, we're going to make a show of force pass first to see if we can get them to stop shooting, Kim transmitted. Stay in formation and follow my lead. The two A-10s screamed down the valley at low altitude, their twin engines producing a distinctive roar that was designed to intimidate enemy forces. The show of force was a standard tactic intended to demonstrate air power without actually engaging targets, sometimes convincing enemy forces to break contact and withdraw. The tactic didn't work. As the two aircraft pulled up from their low pass, machine gun fire continued from multiple positions, and Sarah could see rocket-propelled grenades being fired at the trapped convoy vehicles. Hog 21, convoy leader. The show of force didn't work. We need you to engage those positions immediately. We have wounded who need evacuation. Kim began setting up for an attack run on the enemy positions, but Sarah could see a problem that he hadn't noticed yet. The enemy forces were positioned very close to the convoy vehicles, and the smoke and dust from the firefight was making it difficult to distinguish between friendly and enemy positions. Hog 21, I think those positions are too close to the friendlies for a safe gun run, Sarah transmitted. Kim was already committed to his attack approach and responded tersely. Negative, Black Viper. I can see the targets clearly. Maintain formation. But Sarah could see what Kim couldn't from his angle of approach. One of the enemy positions was directly adjacent to a disabled convoy vehicle, and she could see what appeared to be soldiers taking cover behind the truck. An attack on that position risked hitting friendly forces along with the enemy. Hog 21, abort the run. There are friendlies right next to that target. Kim pulled off his attack at the last second, climbing away from the target area without firing. Black Viper, are you sure about friendly positions? Sarah was studying the ground through her binoculars, trying to sort out the confusing tactical situation below. The ambush had scattered convoy personnel throughout the area, and it was difficult to determine exactly where everyone was positioned. But she was certain that attacking the most obvious enemy positions would endanger the people they were supposed to protect. Convoy leader, this is Black Viper. Can you mark your positions with smoke so we can distinguish friendlies from bad guys? Black Viper, convoy leader. We're pinned down and can't move to mark positions. But I can talk you onto the targets if you can get down low enough to see the details. Sarah made a decision that would define her reputation for the rest of her career. Instead of remaining at safe altitude where enemy fire couldn't reach her, she descended to less than 1,000 feet above the valley floor, flying slowly enough to identify individual positions and coordinate precisely with the ground controller. Convoy leader, I'm coming in low to get a better look. Talk me through what you're seeing down there. Flying at that altitude in an active firefight was extremely dangerous. Enemy forces armed with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades could easily target aircraft flying slowly at low altitude, and Sarah was making herself an obvious target. But she could also see details of the tactical situation that were invisible from higher altitudes. Black Viper, I can see your aircraft. The main enemy position is in the rocks about 200 meters north of our lead vehicle. There's another position across the road on the south side, maybe 300 meters from our rear element. Sarah could now see both positions clearly, along with the locations of friendly forces that were taking cover wherever they could find it. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well, positioning themselves where they could control the road while remaining concealed from air attack. But Sarah also noticed something else, a third enemy position that the ground controller hadn't identified yet, located on high ground overlooking the entire ambush site. From that position, enemy forces could observe and coordinate the entire attack, and they probably had communications equipment that would allow them to call for reinforcements. Convoy leader, I see a third position on the ridge above you, about 600 meters to the east. That looks like an observation post with radio equipment. Copy, Black Viper. We didn't know about that one. Can you engage it? Sarah was now flying in a slow circle around the ambush site, maintaining constant visual contact with all enemy positions while avoiding the most effective engagement zones for ground-based weapons. She had developed an attack plan that would eliminate all three enemy positions in sequence, but it would require precision flying and perfect timing. Hog 21, I'm going to engage the observation post first, then work my way down to the positions near the convoy. That should disrupt their coordination and give the convoy a chance to move. Kim was flying at higher altitude, providing overwatch and backup for Sarah's low-altitude attack. Black Viper, that's a good plan, but watch your altitude. You're getting pretty low for comfort. Sarah began her attack on the observation post, diving from her circling pattern and lining up the aircraft's 30mm cannon on the target. The A-10's gun was designed for destroying tanks and armored vehicles, but it was equally effective against personnel and equipment targets when used with precision. The gun run was perfect. Sarah's cannon fire obliterated the observation post and eliminated the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. As she pulled off target and climbed back to a safer altitude, she could see that the other enemy positions were already beginning to withdraw, having lost their overwatch and command element. But the closest enemy position was still firing on the convoy, and wounded soldiers were lying exposed in the road where they couldn't be evacuated under fire. Convoy leader, I'm going to engage the position north of your lead vehicle. Keep your people down for the next 30 seconds. Sarah's second attack, run, required even more precision than the first. The enemy position was less than 50 meters from friendly forces, and any error in targeting or weapon delivery could result in friendly casualties. She approached from an angle that would direct her cannon fire away from the convoy vehicles, even if her aim was slightly off target. The attack was successful, but as Sarah pulled off target, she heard the distinctive sound of bullets hitting her aircraft. The enemy position she had just attacked included anti-aircraft weapons that had managed to score hits on her A-10 before being destroyed. Black Viper, you're trailing smoke, Kim reported. What's your status? Sarah quickly scanned her instrument panel and found several warning lights indicating damage to non-critical systems. The A-10 was designed to absorb battle damage and continue flying, but she was clearly dealing with the effects of enemy fire. I'm showing some damage warnings, but engine parameters look good. I think I can continue the mission. The third enemy position was already withdrawing by the time Sarah set up for her final attack, but she was able to engage their vehicles as they attempted to escape up a side valley. Her cannon fire destroyed 2 pickup trucks and eliminated the last organized resistance in the area. Convoy leader, all enemy positions have been neutralized. How do your casualties look? Black Viper, you just saved our lives. We have 3 wounded, but we can move them now that the shooting has stopped. Outstanding job. Sarah and Kim remained on station until a medical evacuation helicopter arrived to transport the wounded soldiers to a field hospital. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it had demonstrated every aspect of close air support operations: target identification, coordination with ground forces, precision weapon delivery, and post-attack assessment. During the flight back to Bagram, Kim was unusually quiet until they were approaching the traffic pattern. Black Viper, what you did today was either brilliant or crazy. I'm still trying to decide which. What do you mean? Flying that low in an active firefight is not what we teach in training, Kim said. But it was also the only way to see the tactical situation clearly enough to engage safely. You took risks that could have gotten you killed, but you also probably saved lives by being precise enough to avoid hitting friendlies. Sarah considered his assessment as she prepared to land. She had indeed taken risks that exceeded normal training procedures, but the situation had demanded precision that was only possible at low altitude. Her father's lessons about understanding how machines work had extended to understanding how tactical situations develop and what options are available when conventional approaches aren't sufficient. The post-mission debrief with Lieutenant Colonel Torres lasted over an hour, covering every aspect of the engagement in detail. Torres was particularly interested in Sarah's decision to descend to low altitude and her tactics for engaging multiple targets while avoiding friendly fire. Black Viper, your mission today was successful, but you also demonstrated a willingness to take risks that concern me, Torres said. Low-altitude flying in combat zones is inherently dangerous, and I need to know that you understand the difference between acceptable risk and recklessness. Sir, I understand the risks involved, but The ground situation required precision that wasn't possible from higher altitudes. The convoy was trapped and taking casualties, and time was critical. Torres nodded slowly. That's the right answer, but it's also the answer that could get you killed if you apply in the wrong situation. Combat flying requires constant judgment about acceptable risk versus mission requirements. Today, your judgment was correct, but you need to understand that those decisions will become more complex and dangerous as you gain experience. Torres paused and looked directly at Sarah. I'm going to recommend you for an air medal for today's mission, but I'm also going to assign you to some of our most experienced flight leaders for the next few missions. You need to develop judgment to go with your flying skills. Word of Black Viper's first combat mission spread quickly throughout the squadron and beyond. Sarah had demonstrated the combination of precision flying and tactical thinking that made the difference between average pilots and exceptional ones. But she had also established a pattern of aggressive tactics and risk-taking that would define her reputation throughout her combat tour. Over the following weeks, Sarah flew increasingly complex missions that tested her skills and judgment in various combat scenarios. She provided close air support for special operations forces conducting raids in remote mountain valleys. She conducted armed reconnaissance missions over suspected enemy supply routes. She participated in large-scale operations involving multiple aircraft and ground units working together to clear enemy forces from strategic areas. Each mission added to her experience and confidence, but it also reinforced her tendency to push tactical and technical limits when conventional approaches proved insufficient. Other pilots began to recognize Black Viper as someone who could be counted on to find solutions when situations became desperate, but who also operated closer to the edge of acceptable risk than most commanders were comfortable with. The mission that would establish Sarah's lasting reputation came 6 weeks into her deployment, during an operation to rescue a downed helicopter crew in one of Afghanistan's most dangerous regions. The rescue attempt would test every aspect of her training and experience, and it would demonstrate why her call sign had become synonymous with precision under pressure among ground forces who learned to depend on her when their lives were at stake. But before that defining moment arrived, Sarah continued to develop her skills and build the tactical knowledge that would make her one of the most effective close air support pilots in the theater of operations. She studied enemy tactics and terrain features, learned to anticipate how ground situations would develop, and refined her ability to coordinate with ground forces in the complex and rapidly changing environment of combat operations. The transformation from small-town farm girl to combat pilot was nearly complete, but Sarah's greatest test still lay ahead, in a remote mountain valley where her skills, judgment, and determination would determine whether a helicopter crew lived or died, and whether the call sign Black Viper would become legend or cautionary tale. The emergency call came at 0347 hours on a cold October morning that would change everything for Sarah Mitchell and establish the Black Viper legend permanently in military aviation history. A Chinook helicopter carrying 12 soldiers and 4 crew members had been shot down while conducting a nighttime insertion mission in the Khyber province, one of Afghanistan's most dangerous and remote regions. The helicopter had crashed in a narrow valley surrounded by mountains that rose over 10,000 feet, creating a natural fortress that enemy forces had used as a sanctuary for years. Colonel James Harrison, the wing commander at Bagram Airfield, was awakened by the emergency notification and immediately began coordinating a rescue operation. Harrison was a veteran of 3 combat tours who understood both the complexity of mountain rescue operations and the narrow window of opportunity that existed before enemy forces could reinforce their positions around the crash site. "We have 16 people down in Indian country," Harrison told the assembled aircrew during the emergency briefing. "Intelligence indicates heavy enemy presence throughout the area, and we're getting reports of additional fighters moving toward the crash site. Weather is marginal with low clouds and gusty winds. This is going to be challenging under the best circumstances. The rescue mission would require precise coordination between search and rescue helicopters, fighter aircraft providing close air support, and special operations forces who would fast rope into the crash site to secure the survivors and prepare them for evacuation. Sarah was selected to lead the close air support element, flying with Captain Rodriguez as her wingman. Black Viper, you'll be primary attack aircraft for this mission, Harrison told Sarah during the individual briefing. Intelligence reports indicate enemy forces are already moving to surround the crash site. Your job is to keep them away from our people until the rescue can be completed. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Anything that threatens our rescue operation is a legitimate target. Sarah absorbed the mission details while studying aerial photographs and topographical maps of the crash site. The helicopter had gone down in a valley so narrow that rescue helicopters would have difficulty maneuvering, while enemy forces positioned on the surrounding ridgelines would have clear fields of fire on anyone attempting to land near the crash site. The tactical situation was even worse than the maps indicated. The valley was a natural choke point with only one feasible entrance for rescue helicopters, and enemy forces could observe and control that approach from multiple directions. Any rescue attempt would require neutralizing enemy positions on terrain that provided excellent cover and concealment for defending forces. Sarah's A-10 launched into pre-dawn darkness with a full load of ammunition and precision-guided weapons. The flight to the crash site took 40 minutes, giving her time to study the tactical situation and coordinate with the other aircraft involved in the rescue operation. By the time she arrived over the target area, enemy forces had already begun taking positions around the downed helicopter. Rescue 1, this is Black Viper. I'm on station and ready to begin clearing operations. What's the situation on the ground? Black Viper, Rescue 1. We can see the crash site and several survivors moving around the wreckage. But we're also seeing enemy movement on the ridge lines around the valley. We can't attempt a landing until those positions are neutralized. Sarah began her initial assessment by flying a wide circle around the entire valley, identifying enemy positions and planning an attack sequence that would eliminate threats systematically while avoiding damage to the crash site. Through her targeting pod, she could see at least 12 separate enemy positions, including heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenade launchers that posed serious threats to rescue helicopters. But Sarah also noticed something that changed her entire approach to the mission. The enemy forces were not just defensive positions intended to prevent rescue operations. They were also moving additional fighters and equipment into the valley, apparently planning to capture the crash survivors rather than simply preventing their rescue. Rescue 1, Black Viper. I'm seeing substantial enemy reinforcement moving into the valley from the north and east. This isn't just a defensive operation. They're planning something bigger. I recommend we accelerate the rescue timeline. Copy, Black Viper. How long do you need to clear the landing zone? Sarah studied the tactical situation one more time, counting enemy positions and calculating weapon effects. Under normal circumstances, she would systematically attack each position with precision-guided weapons, ensuring complete destruction before moving to the next target. But time was critical, and she was beginning to formulate a plan that would clear the entire valley much more quickly. Rescue 1. Give me 15 minutes to create some chaos. Then, be ready to move fast. What Sarah did next violated every tactical doctrine she had been taught about close air support operations, but it also demonstrated the innovative thinking that had earned her the Black Viper call sign. Instead of attacking enemy positions individually, she began a sustained gun run that started at one end of the valley and continued for over 2 miles, systematically destroying everything that could pose a threat to rescue operations. The attack was unlike anything most military aviators had ever attempted. Sarah flew her A-10 at extremely low altitude, weaving between ridgelines while maintaining constant fire on enemy positions. Her 30mm cannon fired continuously as she maneuvered through terrain that left no room for navigation errors. The sustained gun run eliminated multiple enemy positions in less than 3 minutes, but it also exposed her aircraft to devastating return fire from positions she couldn't attack simultaneously. Black Viper, you're taking heavy fire. Break off the attack. Rodriguez called from his higher altitude position, but Sarah continued her gun run, systematically destroying enemy positions while bullets and rocket-propelled grenades filled the air around her aircraft. Her 10 absorbed multiple hits, with warning lights illuminating throughout the cockpit, but the aircraft continued to fly and fight. By the time Sarah completed her initial attack, she had eliminated 8 enemy positions and disrupted the reinforcement movement that had been converging on the crash site. But her aircraft was severely damaged, with hydraulic failures and electrical problems that threatened to force her to abort the mission. Rescue 1, primary threats have been neutralized, but I'm showing multiple system failures. You need to move now while I can still provide cover. The rescue helicopters began their approach to the crash site while Sarah continued to circle overhead, looking for additional threats and managing her aircraft's failing systems. She could see rescue personnel fast roping to the ground and beginning to load survivors onto stretchers for evacuation. That's when the situation became critical. As the rescue helicopters hovered near the crash site, enemy forces that had been concealed in caves and bunkers throughout the valley began emerging to engage the rescue operation. Sarah could see rocket-propelled grenades being fired at the helicopters from positions she hadn't identified during her initial assessment. Rescue 1, you have multiple threats emerging from concealed positions. RPGs inbound from your 6 o'clock. One of the rescue helicopters was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade and began smoking heavily, but the pilot managed to maintain control and continue the evacuation. However, the aircraft was clearly damaged and would need immediate assistance to safely evacuate the crash survivors. Sarah faced a decision that would define her military career and establish the Black Viper legend permanently. Her own aircraft was severely damaged and barely flyable. Standard procedures required her to return to base immediately to prevent a complete system failure that could result in another crash. But the rescue operation was failing, and 16 people would die or be captured if she abandoned the mission. She chose to stay. Rescue 1, I'm going to keep these guys busy while you complete the evacuation. Get our people out of there. Sarah began a series of attack runs that pushed her damaged aircraft beyond all reasonable limits. With failing hydraulic systems, she had to fight the aircraft controls constantly while maintaining precision fire on enemy positions. Electrical problems affected her targeting systems, forcing her to rely on visual identification and manual weapon delivery techniques that required her to fly even closer to enemy positions. For 23 minutes, Sarah single-handedly kept enemy forces away from the rescue operation while her aircraft gradually deteriorated around her. She destroyed bunkers, machine gun positions, and mortar sites while dodging surface-to-air missiles and rocket-propelled grenades that filled the valley with smoke and explosions. The rescue helicopters successfully evacuated all 16 crash survivors, but Sarah's aircraft was now critically damaged and barely controllable. She had exhausted most of her ammunition, her primary hydraulic system had failed completely, and her engines were showing signs of damage from multiple hits. Black Viper, this is Rescue 1. All personnel evacuated successfully. You need to get out of there immediately. Your aircraft is trailing heavy smoke. Sarah attempted to climb out of the valley, but her damaged aircraft couldn't maintain altitude in the thin mountain air. She was losing hydraulic fluid and engine power simultaneously, and it was becoming clear that she might not be able to make it back to base. Black Viper, this is Rescue 1. We're seeing flames from your right engine. You need to consider ejection while you're still over friendly territory. But Sarah had one more problem to solve. During her sustained attack on enemy positions, she had identified what appeared to be a command and control facility hidden in a cave complex on the valley's eastern ridge. The facility contained communications equipment and personnel who were coordinating enemy operations throughout the region. Destroying that facility could prevent future attacks on coalition forces.